The 1971 Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act set aside 44 million acres for Alaska's native population. It also called for the study of 80 million acres of additional lands for possible inclusion in conservation areas. In 1980, Congress passed the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, ANILCA. The act created 10 national parks and preserves, 2 national monuments, 9 national wildlife refuges, 2 national conservation areas, 25 wild and scenic rivers, and expanded many of the parks, forests, and refuges already in existence. ANILCA set aside a total of 104 million acres for preservation and protection, doubling the holdings of the National Park Service and the Wild and Scenic River System, and tripling the size of our National Wildlife Refuge System. These conservation areas protect about 1/3 of Alaska's land.
Never before have we seized the opportunity to preserve so much of America's natural and cultural heritage on so grand a scale. We are setting aside for conservation an area of land larger than the state of California.
ANILCA represents the single most significant piece of land conservation legislation ever passed in the history of mankind.
It's been seen as a failure, a significant failure.
A lot of Alaskans were very much in favor of ANILCA, and they worked very hard to make sure it got where it did, and we were all holding our breath till President Carter signed the bill at the last minute.
We just became kind of a whipping boy up here. And it's sad, but that's what happened to us. And we had 2 senators and a representative, and we fought as much as we could, but there was too much overwhelming support to lock away a lot of Alaska, and that's what they did.
My dad spent many years fighting the advent of these parks here. I mean, he was on just about every board and every committee there was, so I heard a lot about it. And he'd been fighting it for 10 years, and then when Jimmy Carter signed the piece of paper that made all the parks upon us here, that's the reason that we kind of didn't fight anymore.
And I was here in Talkeetna when we couldn't buy gas for a short period of time, and we were afraid to wear uniforms on Main Street, because before NILCA was fine, but right after NILCA it was pretty hairy those first couple of years.
They were having the state fair, and they had some targets up there. One was the Ayatollah Khomeini, and the other one was a picture of me. And people would pay for the baseballs, I think $1 for 3 baseballs, and they would decide should they throw at the Ayatollah or should they throw at Jimmy Carter. And a vast majority of them threw at me.
And there was a lot of apprehension on the part of many Alaskans that predicted all sorts of gloom and doom. I remember going to Seward, and the people down there were very distressed over the creation of Kenai fjords. Subsequently, a few years later, however, they had done 180 degrees, been one of the most important factors in their economy. And I think the Alaskans in general have concluded that ANILCA probably provided more benefits than it did detriments.
It's very difficult for federal land managers who come from the lower 48 states because the management is different. There are these series of compromises that allow use of mechanized equipment in wilderness, motorized access across parks, hunting, fishing, trapping. It's very different.
But Anelka, I can tell you one thing for sure, is not like the brochure. You know, all the things that they've said in it in the last 25 years about access and all this, a lot of it hasn't come true.
But it's a national park. Congress set it up to be different, and so there has to be that kind of discussion about, okay, how do you get that access?
The amount of Alaska that is off limits to mining right now is equal to the combined total acreage of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. 165 million acres. If you take Interstate 70 from New York City to the Mississippi River, those are the 7 states you cross. There's that much total acreage in Alaska that right now is in the conservation system unit of some sort.
But fundamentally, the great balance in Alaska is that the state and Alaska Native corporations have about 150 million acres of land for economic development, and the American people have, when all is said and done, 150 million acres of land. That's a good balance.
I moved here almost 30 years ago and thought it was very curious that about the second thing you ever learned about anybody was how long they'd lived here. I thought that was ridiculous. I don't think so anymore. I've changed my mind completely. I think that it matters, that there's an understanding that comes with living kind of apart from the contiguous 48 states.
Sure, we understood that these parks were, for the benefit of all America, but on the other hand, we didn't want them to cut us off our food source or out of the source of our sustenance and culture.
Indigenous people have been caribou hunting at a location on the Kobuk River, probably archaeological evidence would suggest maybe for 9,000 years in exactly the same place, which is amazing. The caribou cross at exactly the same place for 9,000 years is pretty amazing in itself.
I don't want to eat white man food too much. I like eat my own food, what I raise for them. That's what I want. I can eat from store, buy beef and everything. Don't taste like what animal what we eat. Sometimes I sit there, I think about back old way, I just miss. I really miss my old-timey way. I miss my culture.
The way the law is written with the Subsistence Board, it is probably one of the few laws that we have experienced in the Native community that has required Native participation in all these various layers of activity.
Me as a Native person, I haven't even really read that law because as far as I'm concerned, all I know is it's supposed to protect my rights for hunting and fishing.
There were still some issues in the legislation that had to be compromised, some that still grieve me.
In the case of the Arctic Refuge, they punted on whether they were going to allow for oil drilling in the refuge. I mean, it got down to the end of the Alaska Lands Act. It was like one of 2 unresolved issues, and everybody realized that, well, we're not going to resolve this here. We need to pass this bill. let's study it and make the decision later. And so they punted.
My opposition to the drilling is based on the fact that you could not possibly have drilling in that area without harming that sense of wildness, of wilderness, and the absolute wonder that all of that is.
We could conceivably have another 1 million barrels a day to service America's needs for energy for another 25 or 30 years, you know? And I think it can be done reasonably, environmentally safely.
If anybody looks at the data, it's not worth going in there for 6 months supply of oil for our country when we have so many other places and alternatives. We can be more fuel efficient, we can drill in less sensitive areas. We don't need to go into wildlife refuges.
I'm very pessimistic on future economic development in our state as it is right now.
Again, I believe that you could conduct developmental activities in ANWR that would not do violence to the resource. They'll do it only as well as you compel them to do it. We found that out on the Alaska Peninsula.
So as we try to determine what stipulations and restrictions should be placed on that development and encroachment, we can only do so if we understand what the effects will be and what's connected to what. I guess what we've learned at the Toolik Field Station is that it's complex, it's not a simple system, and that it takes time to figure it out.
So why hurry to destroy it? Save a little for future generations. Who are we, people my age, to think that we ought to make all the decisions for those people that are yet to be born? Let them make some of those decisions.
Some of the oil and gas resources, mineral resources, hard rock minerals that we were looking at, over the long space of time, their useful life is fairly short, but these lands will last forever, I hope.
I'm kind of hoping to make it an annual excursion. I love this place. It just means a great deal to me.
As things change, as the populations grow, as technology changes, there's going to need to be flexibility. These are huge lands with communities that live within them or have to cross them. It's going to take everyone working together on the great compromise to make it work.
I remember in 1977 in one of our village hearings in the village of Togiak, one of the old natives there said that if we fail to save the land, God may forgive us, but our children won't.
This is not just a jewel for the folks that happen to live permanently in Alaska, but for all Americans.